Chapter 1. A Wall for the Gods. In the early days of Asgard, before golden halls gleamed and the rainbow bridge arched neatly over the void, the realm of the gods was still very much a work in progress. The gods had their realms to rule, apples of immortality to snack on, and oaths to mutter gravely, but their defenses left something to be desired. To be honest, Asgard was more ceremonial than secure. This became a concern after a few too many unannounced visits from the giants. A tall figure, cloaked, with soot on his hands and confidence in his step. He introduced himself as a master builder and claimed he could construct the perfect wall one that would surround all of Asgard. Tall and unyielding, with stones so tight even the smallest Jotun wouldn't squeeze through. The gods, ever skeptical, asked him for his price. Some were curious, others were less so, but all of them walked in far too easily. The gods debated, weighed risks, and as gods often do, made a deal they would later regret. They agreed on one condition: the builder must work alone. No helpers, no outside labor. Surely a wall of that scale couldn't it be built on time with only one man and one animal, no matter how spirited the creature? If he failed to complete the wall within the allotted time, he would receive nothing. This was no modest cart puller. This was a towering, iron-shouldered stallion who could drag boulders the size of small mountains without breaking stride. And when your neighbors are 20 feet tall and occasionally made of ice, open concept quickly loses its charm. The gods, led by Odin, gathered and agreed something had to be done. Asgard needed a wall, a great, impenetrable wall. The builder worked tirelessly, and his horse worked even harder. Together, they moved stones, stacked walls, laid foundations with terrifying speed. The clatter of hooves and the grind of stone became the unsettling lullaby of Asgard's evenings. Not just a nice decorative boundary, but something that would stand for ages, keep out troublemakers, and make a bold architectural statement. Just as this consensus was forming, a stranger arrived at the gates. Freya, growing understandably anxious about the possibility of being traded away like a shiny trinket, made her displeasure known to anyone who would listen. The impossible looked inevitable. The gods had bargained poorly, and they knew it. Svadilfari never tired, never slowed. Stones flew into place as if the land itself wanted the wall built. He promised he would delay the builder. He would think of something clever. He always did. With that, he vanished into the woods with the air of someone who had a terrible idea forming in the back of his mind. The builder did not hesitate. He named 3 things: Freya, goddess of love. They had long since stopped asking questions when it came to Loki. To outmatch one of the strongest horses in existence by becoming something uniquely distracting. The gods didn't trust him, but they trusted the builder's progress even less. And beauty, the sun, which warmed the lands, and the moon, which lit the night sky. The proposal was met with horrified silence. For a god whose mischief often ended in creative misunderstandings was no small threat. The sun and moon, though not present at the meeting, might have objected too if anyone had thought to consult them. Freya, to her credit, expressed her disapproval with dignified rage. Still, the offer was intriguing. The builder promised to finish the entire wall in just 3 seasons. Just before work was set to begin, the builder asked for one small exception. Could he use his horse? Just his horse. Now, a single horse didn't sound particularly threatening. The gods, convinced they had the upper hand, allowed it. And so the work began. The horse whose name, The builder mentioned in passing was Svadilfari, was no ordinary beast. From the very first day, Svadilfari proved to be the cornerstone of the project, quite literally. The gods watched, increasingly uneasy. Odin, wise though he was, began to frown more deeply than usual. Thor flexed his fingers over Mjolnir with suspicion. By the end of the second season, the wall was nearly done. It was time to summon Loki. Loki's reputation in Asgard was complicated. Charming when it suited him, helpful when bored, and always a little too clever for comfort. They gave Loki a single pressing directive: fix this. If the builder finished the wall, and the gods were forced to hand over Freya, the sun, and the moon, Loki would be held personally responsible, which Loki smiled. As the third season began, the builder worked faster than ever. But then a shift. One evening, the great stallion paused. His ears twitched. His nostrils flared. Something had entered the forest. And Loki, somewhere nearby, was already mid-transformation, preparing not to fight or sabotage, but to distract. The gods didn't ask questions. Something was about to go very sideways. The solution, like most things involving Loki, was about to be memorably strange. Chapter 2. Loki's Wild Idea. The gods of Asgard were not in the habit of panicking, but as the builder's wall rose higher each day, panic began to feel entirely reasonable. The builder was faster than anyone expected. His horse, Svadilfari, hauled enormous stones like they were feathers. At this rate, the wall would be finished on time, and that meant the gods would have to pay up. Freya, the sun, the moon. He was used to cleaning up messes, most of which he had created in the first place. This one, at least, wasn't technically his fault. Yet, none of them were particularly excited to part with those. They didn't care how. Just make sure that wall stayed unfinished. So naturally, they turned to Loki. Loki didn't volunteer for the job. But when every eye in the hall turned toward him, he gave the usual sigh of theatrical resignation. The gods gave him one task: stop the builder. He was strong, focused, disciplined. But even the most disciplined stallion can be distracted. And when he caught sight of this mysterious Mare, just outside the forest, her mane shimmering in the moonlight, her gaze mischievous and fleeting, he did what many horses might do. The heavy stones he was meant to haul were forgotten instantly. Now, Loki had never been one for heavy lifting. Svadilfari was gone thundering off into the trees, in hot pursuit of the strange, enchanting Mare. With no stones, he couldn't finish the wall. And with no wall, the gods didn't have to pay the price. He wasn't about to grab a hammer and start knocking down stone. He whispered something vague and ominous to Heimdall on the way out, just for fun. Then he vanished into the shadows, and the Marm Loki kept just far enough ahead to stay interesting. Not too close, not too far, just the right amount of mystery to keep the stallion running. That sort of thing was better left to Thor. Loki preferred a subtler approach. Trickery, confusion, a clever nudge here and there. And sometimes, just sometimes, a complete and utterly baffling transformation. But most of them, frankly, were just relieved. He didn't return to Asgard right away, because the chase with Svadilfari ended, somewhat differently than anyone had planned. And worse, he would not be getting Freya, or the sun, or the moon. Loki's plan was working. The builder grew angrier by the hour, and with each passing day, the deadline slipped further out of reach. So, as dusk settled over the land, Loki slipped away into the woods. By moonrise, Loki had become something entirely different. Not a bear, not a wolf, not a storm cloud or a raven. No, this time Loki chose something unexpected, something elegant, a mare. Yes, Loki turned himself into a beautiful, graceful, perfectly distracting mare. Now, Allfather was not the kind of horse to be fooled easily. He followed. He didn't just trot. He galloped. Full speed. The builder, standing beside his half-finished wall, stared in disbelief. He called for the horse, whistled, shouted. Nothing worked. After a long pause, Odin stepped forward and gently took the reins. With his horse missing, the builder couldn't move the stones. And somehow, they ended up with a magical 8-legged horse, able to gallop through the air, over water, and even down into the underworld. Loki had done it, in the most Loki way imaginable. For several days, Svadilfari chased the mare through hills and woods. The gods watched this unfold from a distance. Some were amused, others were mildly horrified. Eventually, the builder realized the truth. He had been tricked. The gods had interfered. He did not take it well, but that's another chapter. As for Loki, he stayed away a little longer than expected. Weeks later, Loki reappeared. No grand entrance, no explanations. But he brought something with him. A foal. Not just any foal, an 8-legged foal. Small, gray, alert, and very fast. This was Sleipnir, born of Svadilfari and Loki. Yes, that Loki. The gods blinked. They opened their mouths to ask questions, then slowly closed them again. Sleipnir would become his steed, the fastest horse in all the 9 worlds. So in the end, the wall was never finished. The gods kept their treasures, all thanks to Loki. It was strange. It was ridiculous. And it worked perfectly, just the way Loki liked it. Chapter 3. The Builder's Breakdown. While Loki was off doing whatever it is one does, while impersonating a horse and giving birth to a supernatural steed, things back in Asgard had gotten a bit tense, like a door without a lock, or a helmet with no back. The wall still stood unfinished and impressive, towering arc of stone surrounding most of the realm, but with the final stretch undone, its promise of full protection was only partially realized. He had been so close. The finish line was within sight, until his horse had inexplicably vanished into the woods, chasing a mysterious mare. Breaking a deal wasn't a small thing. And when the builder realized the gods had tricked him technically within the rules, but still very much trickery, he dropped all pretenses. And without that horse, he might as well have been stacking pebbles. It was impossible to meet the deadline. The builder, whose name no one had really bothered to ask, was furious. He stomped and shouted and threw tools. He raged at the sky. He accused the gods of treachery correctly, of course, but that was beside the point. Now here's the thing about oaths in Norse myth. They're not just for show, and unfortunately for everyone involved, revealed his true form. He wasn't just a builder. He was a Jotun, a giant. Or rather, they had Thor. The builder's body hit the ground with a sound like a collapsing mountain. But Asgard was safe for now, and the gods had escaped their bargain with their prized possessions intact. The gods exhaled in unison, some with relief, others with the casual shrug of immortals who had just averted disaster through extremely aggressive construction policy. Professional hammer enthusiast, not known for his subtlety, not the friendly, misunderstood kind. The towering furious, smash first ask never kind. Should they finish the wall themselves? Should they hire a less monstrous contractor? Should they perhaps not make deals with strangers who show up with powerful horses and suspiciously vague resumes? As soon as his disguise dropped, he reached for his tools not to build, but to destroy. His voice thundered through the air. Rocks split, birds fled. Even Heimdall, who rarely flinched, took half a step back. He strolled up to the giant without so much as a greeting, lifted Mjolnir, and well, let's just say the wall wasn't the only thing left unfinished. The sun and moon resumed their celestial duties with minimal complaint, and Asgard, once again, settled into its usual rhythm of barely avoided catastrophe. This was exactly what the gods had feared. Trailing behind him was a strange little foal with legs that seemed to bend in more directions than strictly necessary. Sleipnir would carry the Allfather across the 9 worlds, through fire and mist, which, frankly, was cause for concern, into dreams and war. He would ride faster than wind, faster than light, faster than thought itself. But they had a solution for this too. Thor, god of thunder. Summoned by Odin, Thor arrived with the usual amount of drama sky darkening, lightning cracking, the whole theatrical production. The battle, if you could call it that, was over in a single blow. Now, the wall remained mostly complete. Its upper edge looked a little awkward where the final stones had been left out. Instead, he lowered his head, and something passed between god and steed, an understanding, or perhaps a prophecy. In Norse mythology, those two are often the same thing. Well, mostly intact. Loki had still not returned. But before we get to that part, it's worth noting that the whole affair sparked a bit of a debate among the gods. The vote was inconclusive. In the meantime, Freya was notably relieved to still be in possession of her freedom. And then, just when things had started to feel normal again, Loki returned. He walked back into the golden halls of Asgard, looking far too smug for someone who had recently spent time as a Mare. Sleipnir, gray as a storm cloud, eyes as sharp as spear points, and 8 legs that moved with uncanny grace, even at rest. The gods gathered in silence as the foal stood, blinking calmly, as if the entire strange ordeal had been nothing more than a minor detour on the way to greatness. Odin stepped forward, knelt slightly, and laid a hand on Sleipnir's neck. The horse did not flinch. Without speaking, Odin took Sleipnir as his own. From that moment on, and Loki? Loki did not say much. He simply smiled. Mission accomplished. Sort of. Chapter 4. The Curious Case of the 8-Legged Foal. You might think that after giving birth to an 8-legged horse, even a shape-shifting trickster like Loki would take a break. Perhaps a little time off. A vacation, maybe. But this is Asgard, and in Asgard, downtime is not a familiar concept. Loki returned to the golden halls with Sleipnir trotting behind him, and the gods who had spent years pretending they were unshockable found themselves once again re-evaluating their emotional thresholds. There were a few raised eyebrows, an awkward silence, and at least one muffled snort from Tyr. Odin, for his part, took Sleipnir in stride. He gave the young foal a once-over, nodded approvingly, and that was that. No interrogations, no comments about lead count. He simply took the reins. Still, as Norse gods go, they were nothing if not adaptable. They traveled together across Asgard, through Midgard, and even to the misty edge of Niflheim. The other gods watched with mild concern as their chief god casually explored realms of the dead atop a horse born from the most confusing family tree imaginable. Uncannily so, he seemed to know where Odin wanted to go before Odin did. He could navigate through magical fogs, leap across chasms, and even sense danger before it arrived. Which, given how often Odin tended to wander into dangerous situations on purpose, was a very useful trait. It was hard to tell, really. Loki was not a god who processed consequences the way others did. He viewed chaos not as a side effect, but as a method. And in this case, it had produced a remarkable result. The horse carried him to battles, to councils, and to visions. Some said Sleipnir could gallop along the Rainbow Bridge Bifrost without ever touching the ground. Others claimed he whispered to Odin in dreams. If anyone thought he might settle down after having a magical child, they didn't know Loki very well. Parenthood, for him, was more of a temporary side quest than a lifestyle change. Not as an oddity, but as a figure of reverence. He became not just a mount, but a symbol of speed, of destiny, and of the beautifully unpredictable results that occur when Loki is left unsupervised. Sleipnir, born from one of the strangest events in mythological history, would now be the noble steed of the Allfather. That Sleipnir was touched by prophecy. That his birth was not a fluke, but a turning point. That the strange union of horse and trickster was no accident, but part of a much larger design. His 8 legs weren't just for show. They moved with such precision. Was Sleipnir a beast of burden or something more? A companion or a harbinger? A solution or a beginning? Warriors from all realms came to see him, hoping to glimpse the legendary 8-legged horse that could outrun death and carry gods into battle, and grace that even the Valkyries paused in their training to watch. The horse could run faster than any wind. He could pivot mid-gallop, climb near vertical cliffs, cross water without sinking, ride through the air itself as though the sky were a polished road. Whether that was a promotion or a form of childcare is still open to debate. As for Sleipnir, the foal quickly proved he was more than just a curious birth story. He was, without question, the fastest creature in all the 9 worlds. It didn't take long before Odin began to test Sleipnir's limits. And somehow it all worked. Thor, ever skeptical of anything that couldn't be solved by swinging a hammer at it, occasionally muttered about how a regular 4-legged horse would have done just fine. But even he had to admit that Sleipnir was something special. Of course, not everyone in Asgard was entirely comfortable with the arrangement. The horse was not only swift, but intelligent. There were rumors, of course. Whispers among the lesser gods and spirits. Loki, when asked about these rumors, simply shrugged. He didn't seem overly proud of Sleipnir, nor ashamed. Still, the situation begged questions no one dared voice out loud. As the seasons passed, Odin's bond with Sleipnir deepened. Regardless of what was myth and what was divine exaggeration, one thing was certain: Sleipnir had become indispensable. Meanwhile, Loki returned to his usual antics. Shape-shifting, scheming, making mildly threatening jokes at banquets. Sleipnir grew quickly, as divine horses tend to do. Soon, he towered above the other steeds in the stables. And so, without any formal ceremony, Sleipnir's place in the stories of the gods was sealed. If the gods had any lingering doubts about that arrangement, they kept them to themselves. Sleipnir had arrived, and Asgard, once again, adjusted to its new reality with the weary grace of a family used to bizarre holiday surprises. And this time, The surprise had 8 legs and a future gallop that would echo through myth forever. Chapter 5. The Secrets of the Saddle. By now, Asgard had grown accustomed to Sleipnir. The gods no longer flinched at the sound of 8 perfectly synchronized hooves echoing through the golden halls. The horse had become, much like Odin's ravens or Thor's hammer, one more unusual thing that no longer raised questions. Not just to Midgard, where humans busied themselves with agriculture and occasionally stabbing each other, but far beyond. He visited Alfheim, the home of the elves. He rode through the mists of Niflheim. He crossed the great burning lands of Muspelheim, where the air shimmered and even fire hesitated, or at least not out loud. On one occasion, when riding through the shadows of Helheim, Odin glimpsed Sleipnir's reflection in a pool of still water. It showed not 8 legs, but none. Not a horse, but a shape a blur. Something too old for names and too young for definitions. A ripple in the fabric of things. He played games with children that always ended in something catching fire. Not with affection, necessarily, but with a strange sort of awareness. The gods are powerful, but not all-knowing. They are immortal, but not immune to fate. And fate, in these stories, always rides fast. A quiet recognition that something he had created now lived far beyond his own control. He carved faces into apples and left them on doorsteps. But there was still something mysterious about Sleipnir, something that even the gods could not fully explain. He was not merely a fast horse. He was more like a doorway on hooves. He began speaking in shorter sentences and spending more time alone beneath the branches of Yggdrasil. He whispered to the Norns, those ancient weavers of destiny, and they whispered back in voices older than sound. Was Sleipnir simply fast? Or was there more at play? Did he possess some magic of his own? Was he perhaps connected to the world tree, Yggdrasil, in ways that even Odin had not fully understood? Some believed Sleipnir had no beginning, that Loki's strange transformation had only summoned something that had already existed. Others thought the horse was a gift or a warning from the deeper forces that even gods feared. A creature that seemed to exist halfway between one world and the next, always just a step ahead of explanation. But he was also something else. A presence. A path. A mystery that moved like wind and could not be bridled by reason. He approached Sleipnir with a handful of oats and an easy grin. Half in order. The sun rose and set. Feasts were held. Swords were sharpened. Loki caused trouble. And through it all, Sleipnir remained a silent figure beneath the golden skies. The horse looked at him once, very slowly, and Thor's feet rooted to the spot. Not with magic, exactly. More with understanding. Watching. Standing quietly, eyes watching, waiting. The horse never slept. Or if he did, it was in a way that made no sense to mortal understanding. He simply stood still for hours, breathing slow, body unmoving, like a statue left behind by time. Odin began taking longer journeys. Each time, Sleipnir carried him without hesitation. Through realms, through elements, even through boundaries, the gods themselves could not always breach. The other gods began to ask questions, carefully at first. He rarely answered questions at all, unless he could turn the answer into a riddle. And with Sleipnir, he had no desire to explain. Odin did not answer. In truth, even the Allfather suspected that the horse was something more than he appeared. Odin said nothing. He simply mounted his steed and continued onward. Meanwhile, back in Asgard, Loki was pretending to be very bored. He lounged on high balconies and made sharp comments at feasts. But even as he laughed and plotted and shifted shape to avoid chores, he always kept one eye on Sleipnir. There is an old truth in the myths of the Norse. Perhaps that was Sleipnir's true purpose. Not simply to carry Odin from one place to another, but to carry him forward through fate itself. There were small signs. Odin's dreams grew stranger, his visions deeper, and always Sleipnir was nearby. The gods began to speak of him in hushed tones. Whatever the truth, no one dared to take the saddle but Odin, not even Loki. One day, Thor attempted it, out of curiosity or stubbornness, no one could say. Thor backed away, muttered something about regular horses being perfectly fine, and never tried again. The gods knew better than to press further. Sleipnir was Odin's, and so Asgard continued as it always had, half in chaos, waiting, and always ready to ride. Chapter 6. Loki Gets a Letter. The morning in Asgard was quiet. Birds flew without squawking. The sky looked polished. Even Thor had not broken anything yet. Most of the gods were still asleep after a night of too much mead and too many loud songs. But Loki was awake. He liked mornings like this. It was easier to think, easier to plan, easier to get away with things before anyone noticed. He stood on his balcony, sipping something warm, and pretending he was not already bored. A raven landed nearby. It was not one of Odin's usual ravens. This one looked smaller and grumpier. Tied to its leg was a scroll sealed with gold wax. Loki raised an eyebrow. He untied the scroll and unrolled it carefully. Letters from Odin could be dangerous. Some had exploded in the past. One once turned into bees. This one did not explode. It simply said, "Come to the edge of the rainbow bridge at sunset. No delay." That was all. No riddle. No poem. Not even a threat. Just a location and a time. Loki did not like it. But he went anyway. By sunset, he stood at the foot of Bifrost, the rainbow bridge that sparkled across the sky. Odin was already there, sitting on Sleipnir. The horse, with 8 legs and no expression, stared straight ahead. "Nice horse," Loki said, very dramatic. Odin did not reply. He gave a small nod and motioned for Loki to climb up. Loki sighed. "No carriage? No snacks. Fine." He climbed on behind Odin. Sleipnir began to move. First at a walk, then faster still. The colors of the bridge became a blur. The wind roared past. They rode between realms, past stars and moons, past clouds and shadows. Time did not seem to matter. Finally, they stopped. They had arrived at the edge of Ginnungagap, the great empty space that existed before everything else. The void. It stretched out forever, silent and dark. Loki slid off the horse and stood next to Odin. "Why are we here?" he asked. "To remember," Odin said. "That is not an answer," Loki said. But Odin began to speak. He spoke of the beginning, of fire and ice meeting in the middle of nothing, of how Ymir, the first giant, was born, of the great cow Autumna who fed him, of how the first gods came from the ice she licked. He told of how the gods defeated Ymir and used his body to make the world. His bones became mountains. His blood became the sea. His skull became the sky. Loki listened. He did not interrupt. Odin looked at him. "You made something that can cross every world," he said. "Sleipnir?" Loki asked. You are welcome. He is not just fast, Odin said. He is a key. A way between things, Loki frowned. That sounds important. It is, Odin said. There was a pause. The kind of pause that felt heavy, like something old had just woken up. Why tell me now? Loki asked. Because something is coming, Odin said, and Sleipnir is already moving toward it. Loki looked at the horse. Sleipnir stood still, calm, his eyes clear. You know, Loki said, I only became a mare to trick a giant's horse. Now I have a son who travels between worlds. That was not the plan. Odin said nothing, but there was something like a smile in his eyes. He climbed back onto Sleipnir and held out a hand. Loki took it. They rode home together, back through the stars, back across the rainbow bridge. Neither of them spoke, but something had changed. A path had opened, and Sleipnir, quiet as ever, already knew the way. Chapter 7. The Whisper Beneath the Roots. Back in Asgard, everything looked the same. The halls still gleamed. The gods still shouted at one another across long tables. Thor was arm-wrestling a tree. Freya was politely pretending not to watch. And Heimdall stood silent at the gates, eyes wide, ears open, hearing even the ants sneeze. But something had shifted. Loki could feel it, like a breeze in a sealed room, a whisper before the voice. He could not name it, but it sat with him, followed him through corridors, and drifted beside him when he slept. And Sleipnir? The horse had returned to his usual calm presence, 8 legs moving in perfect silence. His hooves made no sound. His breath never steamed in the air. When he stared at you, it felt as if he were looking not at your face, but through it to where your soul kept its secret drawer. One morning, Odin summoned Loki again. This time there was no letter, just a shadow falling across the breakfast table, and a nod from a one-eyed god who never knocked. We are going beneath the roots, Odin said. Are we taking snacks this time? Loki asked. No, Odin said. Then I will pack my sarcasm instead, Loki replied. They left at once. No horses, no rainbow bridge. This journey went inward. They walked to the base of Yggdrasil, the world tree. Its roots curled through all realms, through ice and fire, through death and dreams. Its trunk held everything together, and its branches touched every sky. Odin touched the bark. The tree moved, just slightly, as if waking. Then a crack opened in its roots. A narrow passage, dark and damp. This is a terrible idea, Loki said. I know, Odin replied. They stepped inside. The air grew colder. The light dimmed. Water dripped from above. The roots of the world tree twisted around them like sleeping serpents. They walked in silence. After some time, they reached a small clearing. In its center stood a pool. It shimmered in the dark. Not with light, but with memory. The water did not reflect faces. It reflected futures, or fragments of them. This is Mimir's well, Odin said. Should I be worried that it is bubbling? Loki asked. That means it is listening, Odin said. They stood beside the pool. For a moment, it was silent. Then the water began to swirl. Loki leaned closer. Shapes appeared in the surface. A great serpent, a broken chain, a wolf's yellow eyes, and always Sleipnir, running through each vision, moving across lands and skies, carrying messages, carrying gods. Is this fate? Loki asked. It is possibility, Odin replied. I do not like possibility. It keeps turning into responsibility, Loki said. But he kept watching. And the pool showed something stranger. Sleipnir, running through a storm, carrying someone Loki did not know. Not a god, not a giant, someone new, a child maybe, or something even younger than that. Who is that? Loki asked. The one who has not arrived yet, Odin said. And what happens to them? Loki asked. That is not for us to know, Odin said. Loki sighed. You bring me all the way down here. Show me pictures in a puddle. And still, I get no clear answers. That is the curse of knowing, Odin said. It only shows you what you are not ready to understand. They turned to leave. But as they stepped back into the tunnel, the pool behind them whispered. A name. It was soft, so soft even Loki barely heard it. And it was not a name he knew. Later, as they climbed back toward the surface, Loki could not stop thinking about that voice, about Sleipnir and the way he moved through the world. Not just as a horse, not just as a mount, but as something much more. A thread, a path, a warning. Back in the light, Odin paused and looked at Loki. You did not mean to make him, he said. No, Loki said, but sometimes the things we do not mean to do are the ones that matter most. They said nothing else. The wind moved gently through the branches. The roots below settled once again, and far away, across the fields of Asgard, Sleipnir turned his head, as if he had heard the whisper too. Chapter 8. A horse walks into hell. The gods of Asgard had seen many strange things. Wolves that spoke in riddles, mead that turned into lightning, a squirrel that carried gossip across worlds. But one sight always caused a pause. Sleipnir trotting down the golden halls by himself. No saddle, no rider, no reason. This time, he moved with purpose. His 8 hooves clipped softly, barely brushing the stone. He passed through open gates, under arched bridges, and finally to the edge of Asgard itself. Heimdall watched him go. He did not stop him. He simply raised an eyebrow and gave the kind of nod that said, well, I suppose even a horse knows more than I do. Sleipnir galloped across the sky, then turned downward down into the cold, down toward hell. Now, hell was not a place one usually visited uninvited, and Sleipnir did not knock. He simply arrived. The land of hell was not fire. It was not chaos. It was the other kind of unsettling, the kind that was too quiet, too still. The trees stood crooked. The rivers ran backward. The air smelled faintly of old metal and forgotten flowers. And hell herself was waiting. She was the daughter of Loki, though the resemblance was not obvious. One half of her face was pale as snow, the other dark and hollow like a moonless night. She sat upon her throne made of bones in silence, and when she saw Sleipnir, she did not smile, but she did speak. You are early, she said. Sleipnir said nothing. He was, after all, a horse. Still, he stepped forward. His hooves did not echo. His breath did not rise. Hel tilted her head. You carry many things, she said. Dreams, messages, warnings. Sleipnir blinked once. It might have been a yes. Tell him, she said. Tell him the wall is not as strong as he thinks. Tell him the roots are listening. Sleipnir did not move. Hel raised one hand, and the shadows in the corners of her hall shifted slightly. Not much, just enough to make one uneasy. Then she lowered her hand again. "You will carry me one day," she said. Sleipnir flicked his ear. No sign of fear, just quiet attention. Hel stood from her throne. Her robes moved like fog. She approached the horse and placed a hand gently on his neck. "You were not born of death," she said, "but you will come to know it well." Then, without further explanation, she turned and walked back to her seat. Sleipnir remained for a moment longer. Then he turned, walked slowly out of Hel's hall, and vanished into the mists. Above in Asgard, Loki awoke with a start. He did not know why. No noise had disturbed him. No dream had shouted at him. He simply felt ... watched. He got out of bed, pulled on a robe covered in gold-threaded mischief, and stepped out onto his balcony. The sky looked the same, but he could feel it. Something had shifted again. That evening, Odin summoned him. "We need to speak," the Allfather said, his voice lower than usual. "Is it about me?" Loki asked. "Because statistically, it usually is." Odin said nothing. Instead, he led Loki to the high tower. From there, one could see across the 9 worlds, if one knew how to look. "You remember the builder's horse?" Odin said. Loki sighed. "Of course I do. Handsome creature. Awful timing. And you remember how you stopped him?" "Yes," Loki said. "I became a Mare. A bold decision. A strange week. And you remember what came from that week?" "Sleipnir," Loki said. Odin turned toward him. "He is not just fast. He is not just clever. He does not just carry gods. He carries fate. And now he has gone where few dare to tread." "Hel," Loki said, not as a question. Odin nodded. "I thought she hated visitors." "She does," Odin said. "But she made an exception. For him." Loki looked out across the sky. "Do you know what they spoke about?" "No," Odin said, "but I know the world felt it." Below them, Sleipnir returned. 8 hooves touched the earth like feathers. He looked up at the 2 gods. Then he turned and walked toward the stables. "I do not like this," Loki said. "I do not like it either," Odin replied. "But here we are," Loki said. Odin nodded. "Here we are." They stood in silence. Somewhere in the sky, thunder rolled once, softly. Sleipnir slept peacefully that night. And if he dreamed, he told no one. Chapter 9. The Message and the Mask. Morning in Asgard was usually loud. There was always some god declaring a duel before breakfast, or someone misplacing an enchanted object that exploded when bored. But today, the sun rose quietly. Even Thor, who often mistook sunrise for a personal challenge, had yet to throw anything into orbit. A small piece of bark, folded neatly, with words scorched into its surface. It had been found tied to Sleipnir's bridle. No one had seen who left it, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Loki stood at the edge of the great hall, holding something he did not entirely understand. It was Odin's. The door is not a gate, but a name, which, if you asked Loki, was just Odin's way of saying something without having to commit to being wrong later. He had not written a message. He had written a riddle. The words read, "The path is not forward, but backward through flame," which was exactly the sort of advice that made one want to knock over a sacred pillar just for emotional relief. Still, Loki knew what it meant. The one no longer used. The one where the gods once gathered before Asgard had a proper dining room. Not because he needed a ride, he could have walked, but because the horse seemed to understand what this was. It sat near the edge of the realm, where the mist rolled in from the void, and the air smelled like forgotten oaths and dust. Sort of. He needed to go to the old hall. Then a breeze swept through the room, though the windows were shut and the light shifted. Not brighter, not darker, just deeper. Stone walls, carved doors, dust motes dancing in the light like tiny drunk spirits. Loki stepped inside and immediately sneezed. He took Sleipnir, of course. Loki stepped through, and Sleipnir followed, his hooves silent on the stone. When they arrived, the hall looked the same. "I see the cleaning elves have retired," he muttered. There was a name carved into the far wall, faded but still there, in the old runes. Not the polished ones the gods used for contracts, but the raw ones from before the first war, made of something between wood and metal, with eyes that seemed open, though it had no face behind them. The name of the first guest who had ever entered Asgard. A giant. Loki touched the carving. It was warm. The door behind him creaked. Sleipnir stood perfectly still. The name glowed. And then the wall opened. It did not swing or slide. It simply was open. Beyond it lay a long stone corridor, lit by flame that did not burn. This was not a place for mortals, or even for most gods. This was a place of memory. Not the kind one recalls after a feast, but the kind that sleeps inside the world itself. They walked until the corridor ended in a round chamber. In the center stood a single mask. It hovered above a pedestal. It was old, older than Asgard, older than the Aesir. Loki approached. He did not touch it. Instead, he spoke. "I assume you called me here." The mask pulsed faintly. Then it spoke. The voice was not loud. It was not dramatic. It was like someone telling you a story through a closed door. "You have made what cannot be unmade." Loki raised an eyebrow. "You will need to be more specific." "That is most of my resume." "Sleipnir," the mask said. Loki glanced at the horse beside him. "Yes, I did not plan that." "It does not matter what you planned," the voice said. "It matters what he carries." "What does he carry?" "Passage." Loki waited, but no further explanation came. "Between where and where?" he asked. "Between what is known and what must remain hidden," said the voice. Loki sighed. "Do you ever give actual answers? Or is the riddle format part of your union agreement?" The mask said nothing. "I miss the days when my worst problem was a builder with a very determined stallion." Then the chamber began to dim. The voice spoke once more. "The storm will come, not because of hate, but because of hunger. And Sleipnir will ride where no gate exists." Loki stepped back. "I do not like any of this." "No one does," the voice said. "But that is the shape of things." The light faded. The mask was gone. Loki found himself back in the old hall, dust on his boots, no wall open behind him. Sleipnir stood beside him, calm, watchful. Loki looked at the horse. "You heard that?" Sleipnir blinked. "Do you understand it?" Sleipnir flicked his tail. Loki sighed again. Together, they left the hall. Behind them, the old name on the wall faded just a little more. Chapter 10. The Storm Approaches. The days in Asgard had a way of slipping by like a skittish goat on ice. Loki, for all his schemes and cleverness, found himself unsettled. Not because of anything he did, though that was rarely the case, but because the world itself seemed to hold its breath. Something was coming. Something no one wanted to admit. Sleipnir, his eight-legged companion, was a quiet reminder of that unease. The horse never panicked, never rushed. He moved as if he carried not only the gods, but the weight of what was to come. Thor noticed it too. Between his usual hammer practice and loud declarations, he kept glancing skyward, as if expecting lightning to strike at any moment. Which, given the nature of Thor, was probably the safest assumption. "Loki," Thor said one morning, his voice a little less thunderous than usual, "do you have any idea what this storm is all about? Because if it involves giants again, I vote we take a holiday." Loki smiled, though it was tight. "This is not a storm you can fight with a hammer, my friend. It is a storm of fate." Odin, as always, was quieter. He watched, he listened. Sometimes he even frowned, which was rare enough to be noticed. The prophecy, the mask, the visit to hell, everything pointed to a reckoning. But Loki was not about to admit that things might get complicated. Again. Then came the signs. The sky darkened without warning. The stars blinked out like candles in a draught. Even the river that circled Asgard, known to flow steadily since time began, started to ripple with unease, and Sleipnir began to pace. He was not the kind of horse to fret over the weather. Loki understood that better than most. One evening, Loki found himself near the gates of Asgard. The wind whispered through the leaves. It carried voices ancient, tangled voices that seemed both distant and dangerously close. Sleipnir was there, waiting. Loki reached out and ran a hand along the horse's neck. "So," he said softly, "we are about to find out if you really can outrun fate." The horse flicked his 8 ears. Loki laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "You are the only one who can, or so the stories say." Sleipnir lowered his head, as if in agreement. The gods gathered. Odin spoke of honor. Thor prepared his hammer. Freya whispered blessings. But none of them looked quite ready, because this storm was not like any other. It was the storm that would shake the foundations of the 9 worlds. And Sleipnir, with his 8 legs and silent steps, was the only one who could carry them through it. Loki mounted the horse. "Hold tight," he said. Sleipnir leapt forward, faster than any wind, carrying the weight of gods, fate, and the uncertain future. The story of Sleipnir is not just about an unusual horse with 8 legs. It is about the unexpected ways fate weaves through the lives of gods and giants alike. Born from chaos and trickery, Sleipnir became a symbol of strength, speed, and the strange beauty that can emerge from the most unlikely places. In the grand halls of Asgard, where gods feast and legends grow, Sleipnir's story reminds us that even the wildest surprises can carry great purpose. He is the bridge between worlds, the silent rider through storms that cannot be faced head-on. And as you listen, letting the quiet hum of the old myths settle like a soft blanket, remember that some journeys are not just about reaching a destination. They are about riding through the unknown with steady legs and calm hearts. So now it is time to rest, to let your thoughts drift gently like Sleipnir's hooves over the quiet roads of dream and memory. Good night, and may your dreams carry you swiftly and safely, just like the 8-legged horse of legend.